Hey guys, what is up, and I welcome each and every one of you to a new League of Legends video. This is going to be another top 5 video, but this one I will be talking about the top 5 underrated AP mid lane champions. These are the champions that I personally feel each and every one of them are strong to a certain point, but at the same time I don't really see them picked very often. Now there's of course obvious reasons as to why this is, and for the majority of the champions I will list, that reason could be the fact that none of them, or at least very few of them, have any very good escapes. But if you were to kind of push that aside and look at all the positives, I do think each champion that I list here has extremely solid positives. And once again, in my opinion, they are somewhat underrated, and maybe after this video, some of these champions will surface closer to the top. So the point of this video is again to try and maybe pick up a champion that is not exactly popular yet, or just to find something new. So without further ado, let's go straight to the number 5 spot. Now the number 5 spot is going to be Victor, and the reason I want to finally put him in one of these lists is the fact that he finally got a rework. So the thing about the rework is that it didn't necessarily change his playstyle. I mean, he's still pretty much the same champion, he's just a Super Saiyan version of the old Victor. Pretty much the same thing with small differences, but just overall stronger. So the main thing I want to talk about is his upgraded E. It is a lot better now than it was before because the damage that it can do is absolutely absurd, and the fact that it's burst damage rather than just a small little dot is also a plus. And thanks to the upgraded version of his E, his wave clear has increased a lot. Another really cool thing I liked about the new Victor is the fact that his ultimate, even when it's not upgraded from his item, it still moves very fast. The problem with the old Victor was the fact that his ultimate, if you don't upgrade it, moves extremely slow and it's impossible to keep it on a target, but now it's really easy. Speaking of his item, the thing that he starts off the game with and that you have to have in your item for pretty much the whole game, it is actually not so bad now. Before, it was quite a hindrance and you would almost never want to have it, and if you could, you would sell it, but now, it's really not that bad. The stats that it offers are pretty nice. The fact that it upgrades for every single ability now, which I believe is 4 times, is also quite a big plus, giving him more scalability. His Q now gives him a sheen type effect on his next auto attack, which is also pretty nice for the trading part of the laning phase. And finally, like I said at the beginning, he's just a better version of the old Victor. And the upgraded portion of his W that drags him into the center is also pretty useful, on top of his W just being extremely strong in terms of cutting off choke points. However, the cons of this champion is the fact that again he is still very similar in playstyle. So if you really did not like the old Victor, you might not like this one either. And here's a pretty common con that we'll have throughout this video. He has no good innate escapes. No blink ability, no dashing ability, nothing of the sort. The damage on his Q is somewhat mediocre, not including the auto attack damage portion that he gets off of it, which means that you have to somehow get the auto attack off because the damage on the Q itself is not very high. And overall, I feel like Victor finally deserves to make some sort of appearance, and I'm pretty happy to put him in the number 5 spot. Let's move on to the number 4 spot, where we're going to be looking at our favorite creature from the void, Velkoz. This is a champion that has been getting a lot of mixed reviews, some people claiming that he's just simply overpowered, but others saying that he's the most underpowered champion to come out since a very long time. In my perspective, I consider Velkoz a champion with huge potential, and overall I do think he's a pretty sweet champion. So one of the first things that I want to mention, and probably the thing I like about him the most, is the fact that he has one of the highest damaging combos in the game. Assuming you land your E, W, Q, then your ultimate, including his passive, you can instantly chunk people down. And speaking of his W, it has pretty sweet wave clear, especially the fact that it has 2 charges. The mana cost on it isn't the highest, so it's also pretty nice to poke in lane, and the damage if it hits both times is quite high. And probably the most important thing on Velkoz, and what makes him really strong, especially when you consider burst, is his passive and the true damage that it deals whenever you hit enemy champions with your spells. And his passive is quite honestly the reason as to why he does so much damage when you combo all of his abilities. A somewhat small but also pretty cool thing that I like about Velkoz is if you land your E on a champion that is very close to you as a Velkoz player, it actually pushes them back very slightly. And the final thing is his ultimate, the big laser that absolutely just shreds and melts through champions. It has great range, the damage procs every quarter of a second for 1 second, making your passive tick so often. And the best thing of all is that on top of everything else, his ultimate also slows. The cons of Velkoz is the fact that he's purely skill shot oriented. So with that being said, he's kind of like a worse version of Xerath in terms of the range of his abilities. Sure, Velkoz could potentially do more damage than Xerath, but Xerath can land his abilities easier and safer. And with that being said, his Q is quite awkward to use, and like most other champions in this list, he has no escapes. But still, this is definitely a champion that is worth picking up, because if you can master him and land all of his abilities, or at least the majority of the time, you will shred through the enemy team and probably hard carry your games. The number 3 spot is going to be featuring our favorite evil Yordle, Veigar. This is a champion I think I've been featuring in almost every single top 5 underrated list, and I see no reason as to why not to feature him again. This is a very scary champion if fed. So the first thing is that he's kind of like an AP version of Nasus. The more you let him farm and get kills, the more he'll get stacks off of his Q, and the more AP he'll have, and the more damage he'll do. So he's always one of those champions that you gotta kind of keep an eye out throughout the game. And then you have his ultimate, which is just, I mean, it's just so good. It's not a skill shot or anything, and the amount of damage that it deals is just absurd. Then you have his stun, which if you're kind of new to Veigar, can be somewhat awkward to land. But if you've played Veigar and you kind of got used to the stun, it's so useful because the range on it is huge. And it can be very annoying for the enemy team to deal with in a team fight. Then you have his W, which of course can be somewhat difficult to land, which is why you usually want to combo it with your stun. But if you do manage to land it with or without your stun, the damage on it is huge. And the fact that it's AoE can honestly be the difference between winning and losing a team fight based on just how well you position that W. And overall, I just consider Veigar to be a very scary caster, one of those people like Velkoz who you just don't want really sitting in the back farming up, throwing out all their crazy damaging spells. You want to be able to get on them and get on them fast. The cons of Veigar is the fact that he has somewhat of a weak laning phase, since it does take him a bit of time to ramp up. But it is possible to run pure AP runes and then have your Q deal pretty decent damage at level 1 and 2. A major flaw of Veigar is the fact that he doesn't have a very good poke. I mean, sure, you can use your W, but let's be honest, no one's gonna get hit by that unless you stun them. And if the enemy team is sieging your tower or you're sieging their tower, there's really not a whole lot you can do. You can't throw your Q because the range on that is just too small, and you'll probably just die. So the range on his spells is very short. Also, his kit kind of relies on him just being able to burst one person, and then that's about it. Unlike someone like a Xerath or even a Velkoz, once he uses his Q, his ultimate, and his W, it kills one person, sure, that's great, but after his ultimate is gone, he doesn't have a whole lot of things he can do after that. So the damage output from Veigar is not consistent. And, like all the other champions, no escapes. But still, definitely a strong contender for the top underrated champions. Moving on to the number 2 spot in this list is going to be Anivia. Now this is a champion I don't think I've ever included in any single one of my lists. And at the same time, this isn't a champion that I personally enjoy playing, but this is a champion that I most definitely do not like seeing against me. And I really am happy that I just simply don't see many Anivias, because the very few Anivias that I do see are just so annoying and so difficult to deal with and are just so strong. So Anivia does have one of the best wave clears with her Q and her ultimate, which is definitely one of the main things that makes Anivia so annoying to play against. Sieging against her is so difficult. Then you have her wall, which obviously can be so game changing. And I think around rank 3 or 4 of the wall, you can pretty much cut off a whole area in the jungle. Probably one of the most influential spells in the game. As if that's not enough already, let's talk about her passive, which arguably is one of the strongest passives in the game. This makes her laning phase actually a lot stronger than it should be, because you can't simply just tower dive Anivia. And a lot of the times when you're getting ganked, you can probably get very close to your tower, but if Anivia gets close to her tower and dies, she'll just go into egg form, and you can't stay on her tower auto-attacking her egg form because you'll die. And in teamfights, you can't necessarily focus her down either because again, she'll go into egg form. It's almost like a free Zanya's. Another cool thing about Anivia is the fact that you can build her pretty tanky like a Rod of Ages, and not even get a Rabadon's and be so tanky, but at the same time your E will just deal so much damage. She also has a pretty good amount of CC. And finally, especially with the current meta, I do look at Anivia as somewhat of an anti-assassin champion, because her egg is very annoying for assassins to deal with, since it is kind of like a GA or Zanya's in teamfights, but also because of the sheer amount of damage she can put out if you get too close to her, thanks to her Q, E, and ultimate. Now the cons of this bird is the fact that her playstyle is somewhat unique, which means that playing her for the first few times will be very difficult. On top of that, much like Veigar, she is a low range oriented spellcaster, which means for a good portion of a fight, she does have to be somewhat close range. Like every other champion so far, no escapes. I mean, her stun and her wall definitely can be pretty useful, but there's no innate escapes like a dash, a flash-like ability, or something like the first place champion in this list has. And the final thing is the fact that your wall, as good as it is, can also be very bad, as you can trap your own teammates as well. Overall, a worthy place, and I really hope that a lot of people don't pick her up because I just hate facing her. And the number 1 spot on this list goes to Lissandra. This is definitely the champion that I feel like is the most underrated, and I just feel like she has so much potential. I really do think that her kit is one of the best. So her kit offers huge amount of CC. I mean, her Q slows, her W is an AoE snare, and her ultimate literally locks down one target. It's like a Warwick ultimate, but better. And what even puts the cherry on the cake is the fact that she can use the ultimate on herself, dealing AoE damage while putting her in a stasis. Then you have her E, something all other 4 champions on this list so far did not have. giving her a super strong escape. But on the flip side, this E can also be used to engage, which is something that I feel like Lissandra is very strong at doing, engaging with her E, popping ultimate on a high priority target, your team rushes in, the enemy team will start focusing you, but then usually you'll have a Zanya, so you pop that, and then you just engage a beautiful team fight for yourself and for your team. She's also somewhat of an anti-assassin champion because she can lock down a target and make them just simply be a sitting duck. Her wave clear, though it's not the very best, is also pretty good because her Q will spread to most of the minions and you can usually use your E to finish off the rest. I mean, it's not as good as someone like Anivia, but it's still pretty sweet. And on top of that, her laning phase is not so bad, since she can definitely poke with her Q, which can be a little difficult if you're not used to it. And ganking her is also very hard, since not only can she just maybe ult someone, she can W, she can Q for the slow, but she has her E, which can cover so much distance so fast. And on top of that, her E can go through almost every single wall. The cons of this champion is that the Q range is pretty bad, and it's pretty much required to hit something in order to make a splash. Her passive is meh, it's not the best, but it's not the worst. I mean, it does help her with some of the mana problems, but overall, pretty bad. And the final thing, which seems to be a trend in the top 3 underrated AP mid, is the fact that she's also a close range caster like Anivia and Veigar. Except this champion really likes to get into the middle of the fight. So overall, I think this champion is definitely deserving of the #1 spot, and I really truly do think that she's the most underrated AP mid lane in the game. Alright guys, that's it for this video. Before I end it off, I want to give a special mention to Azir. Now this is a champion that I really wanted to include, but since he's still somewhat new, it's hard to put him in such a list. But I really do feel like Azir has a lot of potential and is definitely also underrated. So just a small special mention of Azir. But it still does mark the end of this video guys, so I really hope you did enjoy it, maybe learned something new, found some new champions that you want to try and pick up, and overall just enjoyed the video. Please don't forget to throw in a like if you did enjoy it and share it with your friends. And also don't forget to follow me on my Facebook and Twitter handles, both Redmercy LOL. But with all that being said guys, I hope you did enjoy it, and I hope to see you for the next video, which probably will be my top 5 cheese mid champions. Peace!